Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Allure of the Poor, sponsored by Dracaena Wines. I am your host, Lori, and I am here today with the winemaker for Girard Winery in Napa, Glenn Hugo. And it is a pleasure to meet you today. So welcome, Glenn.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Nice to join you.
Thank you. And the first question I always ask is, the kind of the origin story. So you're actually a Texan, and I got to say, you don't have that Texan, drawl or brawl, whatever you call it in Texas. You don't have that. So how did we get into wine in Texas?
Well, I got into wine through the restaurant industry. So I served, a decade and a half in the restaurant industry, and fell in love with wine through that. And the whole idea of food and wine and how important they are together was what lured me out to eventually to make it out to Napa to want to learn how to make wine. So my wife and I had come out here quite often as guests, and eventually we made a decision, actually on the night of our honeymoon, to quit our jobs in Texas and move out to Napa.
Nothing like
so
big change to big change.
yeah, big leaps of faith. But yeah, we moved out here in 2003, about 6 months after we married. So
wow.
And Texas was our home, and we still love Texas, but this is kind of where I felt was best to become involved with winemaking. This is Napa and Sonoma, for that matter, are two areas that are, obviously renowned for wine. So if you're going to learn to make wine in America, I don't know that there's much better place. So that's what drew us out here. But yeah, not much of an accent. I when I am back in Texas, I start to use y'all a little more, and it slips out a little bit. But otherwise, yeah, I don't have much of the draw.
I know that feeling when I speak to somebody with brogue. My brogue comes out, and I don't naturally have a brogue, but it automatically comes out. The Irish in me somehow has created its own brogue. So I understand that you go back and you just start picking up where you almost left off, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So do you have an aha wine? Do you have a wine in your memory that you're like, wow, this is what wine is, and okay, this is some good stuff?
Yeah, actually, my wife Pam and I, we had a moment like that many years ago when we had a friend come to town who was a chef friend of ours and worked in the restaurant industry with us, and he had long been a fan of Chateauneuf de Pape wines, and I was still young at the time, still learning. Both of us were learning. And while I had some knowledge of it, I wasn't as knowledgeable about the region and the wines. But I'd found an old bottle of Beaucastel in this little liquor store in Dallas that, normally you wouldn't go there for wine for sure. But they happened to have some. It would look like somebody had bought it years ago and they'd kind of forgotten about it. And it was on the bottom of the shelf with one of the old school little reduced stickers on there, like the gun. And so I bought it, not thinking much of it, whether it was going to be any good or not. And when that friend finally came over to dinner, we opened it. Initially, we were all kind of like, "Whoa, this is funky. This is weird. There's a lot of weird things happening with this right now." Luckily, we didn't just discount it completely. We pushed it aside, opened up something else. And about 15 minutes later, my wife stuck her nose back in the glass, and she was like, "Oh my gosh, let's come back to this one." And for about 15 minutes, we just could not stop describing the wine. I mean, we barely even tasted it. We're just smelling all these amazing characteristics in the wine, getting the most detail oriented we've ever been in describing wines. It wasn't just mushrooms. It was like mushrooms with, butter and thyme, and, just really felt like, we could see every little aspect of the wine. And for us, that was like just mind blowing. Like we've never seen a wine, have so much expression. And it was about 15 minutes of that, and then it died. But
well, at least you didn't miss it.
No, exactly. Yeah,
Good thing
that's
your
the beauty
wife
of
was
wine,
there.
right? For sure.
So you actually started as a harvest intern, and then you've gone through kind of a few steps, a few ranks to get to winemaker. So how did you come to, were you a harvest intern at Gerard?
Yes, I was. I actually started when I moved to Napa. Knocked on a bunch of doors. I got a job in a winery, working in the tasting room, and then I got a job in a wine bar here in Napa. And at the time, this is 2003. It's pretty sleepy town. Downtown Napa. Hardly anybody would go there. In fact, we'd never gone to downtown Napa every time we'd come out here previously, but this little wine bar was kind of the spot where all the locals hung out, and I got to meet a lot of winemakers. It's where I eventually met, at the time, Gerard's consulting winemaker, Marco Di Giulio, and he's the one who took me in for the 2006 harvest, and that was my first harvest at Gerard. And I stuck around. They offered me a full-time job, and for a while I was the only hourly employee because we were that small back then.
Wow.
But to your point, I moved up the ranks from an intern to a full-time position. Eventually, the cellar master. Eventually, the assistant winemaker, and then 2010, I became a winemaker of Gerard. So
That really wasn't that long of a, right? You said 2006 to 2010. That's a pretty quick, incline there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel very fortunate. It's a very, the industry as a whole is this way, but Gerard especially was very welcoming, teaching me, as much as I'm willing to learn. And the industry is much like that for a lot of people's experience that come to it from other walks of life. It wasn't that I hadn't have knowledge of wine per se, because I'd been involved with it from the restaurant industry side, but that was more in the knowledge levels and tasting and the ability to describe wines, but from production to learn the chemistry side of things and the science of it all. Once people see that you're passionate about wine, you're passionate about what you do, you're hardworking, a lot of doors open up for you in this industry. So, and I'll say that, we've had so many interns over the years, since I was an intern, that have either stayed with us and grown through our ranks, or have moved on to other wineries, but are now, winemakers, assistant winemakers, enologists, etc. Wineries not only in Napa, now we've got people all over the world working at wineries that worked with us at one point or another. So I'm always very proud of that, because I think that's what is the beauty of this industry. It's very welcoming in that regard. So
I have to agree. Yeah, I think that the industry, more so than a lot of others, recognizes passion as a very important aspect of success in it. And they go with, well, you can learn this as you go along, but you need to have this passion in order to, it's a baby, right? You got to coddle the baby. The wine's a baby. You got to coddle it. And if you don't have the passion to coddle it, to make sure it gets nudged in the right direction without over pushing it, right? So I think that is true in the wine industry.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm always been proud of us, continuing that same ideology, that if you find people like that, to do your best to encourage them to be a part of it.
Do you, so as a harvest intern, you spent a lot of time in the vineyards, right? And now do you get to spend as much time in the vineyard? Where do you prefer to be? Do you like being in the winery or the vineyard?
Both. I mean, I wouldn't pick one or the other over the other, but vineyards for us are, it's where everything starts. So it's important for us to be a part of that. I feel very fortunate that we have the opportunity to work with our own estate fruit. We have several vineyards of our own that we work with and we own, and we're involved with the decision making there. But opposite to that, we work with a lot of growers. There's quite a few that have been around since I started at Gerard, and we still work with them. So those long-term relationships with growers are really important to us. We continue to build them. We have some that we've had for over a decade. plus, and then we have some that, you know, we may have picked up in the last couple of years. But, you know, when you work with a grower and there's a mutual respect there, and there's an understanding of what, you know, the goals are, and, you know, to be, you know, from their perspective, they're looking to work with people that they can be proud to say that they took, you know, this product that they worked really hard to do the best job with and made it into something that, you know, they would be proud of. They don't want their grapes to just go to anywhere, and, you know, that they could care less of what the quality is. We work with people that want to know that it's going into a quality wine, and that we take the passion that they get delivered to us and continue with it to making the best wine possible. So it's really great to have that kind of nuance. You know, I often you know, use the restaurant industry as examples, but it's much like a chef finding, you know, great purveyors to work with for their meat or their seafood or their produce, dairy, etc. You know, they want to know that it's coming from a quality product, and on the opposite end, those producers want to know that, you know, it's going into something that will have an end product that's amazing and delicious. So we have a very similar kind of understanding with our growers as well. So love being involved with them, love being involved in the vineyards when they can. But, you know, when we take that fruit from them and get it into the cellar, that's when we start doing, you know, our portion of it, and we're, you know, our side of the magic happens. So equally important and equally fun and challenging.
So you, coming from the other side of it, the restaurant side and retail, being the manager of that little place called the Bounty Hunter Wine Bar, do you think, you know, it's often said that making wine is the easy part, selling it is really the difficult part. So you being on the other side of it, do you think that plays a role, like, as being in the restaurant industry and knowing what people purchase? Do those aspects play into a role as you are trying to make your wine into, you know, okay, this I know from the restaurant side is what people are looking for, or from retail, and so I'm going to take that and put it into how I develop the wine?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's definitely a part of our mentality throughout the process, and ultimately what we bring to the final bottling is something that we hope that you know, the people that are fans of our wine will enjoy. And, you know, I mentioned earlier about, you know, the restaurant side of it taught me about food and wine. So that aspect alone is a big part of, you know, decisions we make in the process while we're making wine. And I've always been, you know, attuned to that. I try to be, at least, to say that I want this wine to work, you know, on the dinner table. I want it to be part of, you know, somebody's experience with their friends and family, you know, during a nice meal. So it's always kind of in our mindset, you know, what are we doing with our wines to help attribute, you know, the best level of quality and styles of winemaking that would, you know, work well with food and just the general idea of being a part of a dinner table is always in the top of my mind. And, you know, there are things we make decisions on throughout the process, from beginning through fermentation to even barrel aging to the blending process, that help us kind of hopefully deliver on that promise of what styles we are trying to make. So it's definitely a consideration.
So I have opened your 2017 Old Vine Zinfandel. And I got to tell you, I am a Zin maniac. Like, I was a Zin fan. My husband and I were both Zin fans long before it was cool to be Zin, you know, to be a Zin fan. And then, you know, sadly, I think Zinfandel has kind of dropped in the public's eye a bit. Mostly, I think a lot because they got a little out of control with where, you know, it got to the point where it was, you know, 16-17% alcohol and a big bomb. And I think the problem was they weren't balanced, because you can have 16-17% Zins today, and if they're quality Zins, they're, you know, they're excellent. So tell me about this Zin. First of all, it says Old Vine. So for my listeners, there is no true definition, legal definition of Old Vine, right? Somebody can call it Old Vine if they would like. So why are you calling this Old Vine? Where are these vines from, and what are their ages?
Yeah, you're correct. I've actually been through an audit with the TTB with that very wine years ago, and I even asked them that, like, are you going to make a decision and decide what old vine means? And they didn't want to. They were more just interested in why we would use that reference. So, but we decided to use it initially just because it was a distinction that we are trying to source wine from older vines. To your point, there isn't a benchmark of what that means for us. There's several vineyards we use, but there's two that are the primary part of this blend. There's a vineyard that is in the southern eastern part of Napa. Now these vines are more in the 50-year range, so not by any means, they're not century old, but they're also
but that's
not,
pretty old, right? Yeah,
that's still pretty old. As somebody who's come up to his half century mark, I consider that old enough. But they are part of the blend that is more a little more lively, and they bring a little more fruit to the blend. They're a little more racy too. The other portion, the other vineyard I was referring to, is up in the northern part of Calistoga, and it's this vineyard that these vines are in the 100 plus year range. We're in our fourth generation of working with the fourth generation owners of the property.
wow.
And these 100 plus year old vines, are also very interesting. There's a little more complexity to them in some ways, but not necessarily as much fruit forwardness. And so combining these two are important to us. We could easily just bottle the 100-year-old plus vines, and I guess that would be very old vines, but we feel like the combination of the two is what's important. They work together really well when we blend them. And so old vine is a distinction for us, although a lot of people may use it. There are some that are anti old vine designates because they don't feel like that's necessary, but we like to use it to just distinguish that we are sourcing fruit from these older vines. Zen has got a lot of history in California. Unfortunately, we've ripped out a lot of the Zinfandel in California to replant it to, in Napa, it's usually because they're going to replant it to Cabernet. So we're happy to still be able to support and find fruit of that age and of that quality that we can offer in the glass. And to your point a moment ago, we're trying to make this wine, using your term, balance. And as winemakers, I think we try not overuse that term because it gets used a lot, but I love the term because that's exactly what we're looking for. We want you to see that fruit. We want you to see that complexity. We use 3 types of oak in our Zin, American, French, and Hungarian oak. We actually have a barrel that we've had designed with one of our barrel makers, a Cooper Juice. This Cooper has made a single barrel for us that has French and Hungarian staves throughout the barrel, and then the heads of the barrels on both sides is American oak.
That is so
it's
cool.
actually it's referred to as a fusion barrel, as they call it. And this fusion barrel helps incorporate the 3 different characteristics all in one. And we've found that it integrates really well with Zen. I often describe it as the American oak, adding some of that kind of smoky, meaty note. The Hungarian brings a lot of different kinds of spices, including kind of that Christmas spice arrangement of like cinnamon. Yeah, cardamom. There you go. And then the French oak is that more classic structure that we expect of French oak, but also some of those more like mocha vanilla characteristics. So the 3 work really well with Zen, and that's one of our mainstay barrels that we use for this particular wine. We hope that you find a balance like that.
Yeah, it's definitely dark fruit. And the cardamom is what it pops out to me, which I absolutely love. And it's funny. Well, not that it's funny. On the nose, there's like a little whiff of cocoa powder, like as if the powder kind of blows past your nose. But on the palate, there's more mocha on the palate. It's more of a, of an actual chocolate mocha thing on the palate. But it definitely is balanced. I don't know. The alcohol is 15. And it definitely doesn't scream out alcohol at all. But it is lively. It does have a lot of fresh fruit coming out on it. But I'm gonna let it sit a little bit to open up a bit, because I just opened it about 10 minutes before. So I'm sitting here swirling away. But I love the nose of it. The cardamom and the dark fruit is wonderful. And then that mocha is perfect. It even it has on the palate, it has just and it probably will come out more, a little of that white pepper that you expect in a Zinfandel. Right now it's more kind of on the back palate, but it's there. It's beautiful. And it definitely doesn't taste like 15. So kudos, because it's very balanced. Again, that word, but everything is integrated. The tannins are there. You can actually get, I can't say I can get Hungarian, but there you can do I can get a little bit of the French oak is there, but it's kind of cool. So I was going to ask about the barrel later, but since you brought it up, so they produce the barrels by just sourcing different staves, the French, the American, and the Hungarian staves, and then they produce the barrel. Is it equal amounts of it generally?
Yeah. So when we first did this, this is back in, it was when I was still the assistant winemakers when we started testing these barrels. So I guess it would be around 2008, 2009, we started the project. And the idea was that we were purchasing each of those individually and still using them in our Zin blend. I think we're going to talk Petit Syrah as well, but that's another wine that we do this with. And the idea that they came to us with was to create one barrel that had all three. And initially we were a little reluctant to say, what's the point? We can buy each of them individually and still blend them. But what we found was that ultimately the wine, it felt like it integrated even better with the three being in one barrel. And what they do is they basically came to us and said, we can do this all different kinds of ways. Like how much would you want to have? Do you want this much, want more French than American, Hungarian, et cetera. And then, we also had to get into the discussion of how the toasting levels would be on it. But we did a trial for 3 years to eventually end up with the barrel we use now. A certain toast level that we decided on, but the makeup of the barrel is, if you did the math on it, considering the staves are French and Hungarian, but the heads are American, it actually works out to approximately a third of each of the three. So it's an equal mix of all three of them as far as surface area that is in contact with the wine, approximately. So it's pretty much an equal mixture of all three.
And I've heard of these fusion barrels before, and you're I think like the only, like the second winery that I've heard is using them. So these are being produced specifically for you.
Yeah. At the time, we were one of the first people to do it with them. I think for the longest time, if you Googled it, I was one of the first, comments on the barrels of using them, testimonies. But I know more people are doing it now, and we've had some other projects we've done on the side for different labels that we've done different versions of this, like because again you can choose what the mixture is. So we've done some that are just American and Hungarian and no French, and just different iterations of them. So, but the one that we chose, we've continued with for the Zin and Petit Syrah program, for that matter. We've been using that same barrel for going on 10 plus years now.
So when you're producing your small batches, are you putting however many barrels you have of this, is all of your Zin going into fusion barrels, or are you still also putting some Zin in American oak, some Zin in French oak, some Zin in Hungarian?
I do play with some of the individual oak as well. So it's not 100% just fusion, okay. But it is the primary barrel that we use for it.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Some years I feel like, we need to put a little more French maybe, or maybe one year we might need a little more of the American influence, etc. So I do like having that flexibility as needed.
Okay. And now Girard Winery, the winery itself was built, it's relatively new. It was only 2018 that it was redesigned, I guess, or was it?
Yeah, this current winery. Now the brand, the winery originally started in the 70s. It was a father and son, and current ownership we took over in the early 2000s. So, but the name, the father and son that started it, they were focused in Oakville, where the location was. When we bought it, we started moving around. We were much smaller back then, and so we were doing some custom crush scenarios at different smaller wineries. And eventually, this piece of land that we're on now came available to us, and so it was a vineyard that we ended up ripping out what was there because there was problems with the vineyard, and ultimately built the new Girard Winery in 2018. And then we planted new vineyards around it as well. So we have some new vineyards as part of the property as well.
Very nice. And the winery was built being dedicated to really being green, right? There's a lot of things that allow you to be green.
Yeah, we're continuing that focus, a more sustainable outlook. We some of the nowadays they become easier and more obvious with solar, and even little things like LED lights everywhere that are also motion censored. I mean, you don't think about how much energy you use in a production facility until you start finding ways of saving it, and then you realize, wow, all along we could have saved a lot of energy. So it's been a it's been a process for us to try and be as efficient as possible. Another entirely, beyond just energy, is a huge focus for us is water. We're in California, and we're in the midst of another drought series of years, and water just continues to be a challenge. So it takes a lot of water to make wine, especially when it comes to cleanliness and making sure we clean properly and sanitize. So we've found a lot of ways to conserve our water resources as well. And sometimes that, it takes capital expenditures to do so. But as a company, we've come to realize that the long-term benefits of that outweigh any initial investment. So every year we tend to put more money into new ideas that will try and save us those resources as well.
That's awesome. Now, there are 16 nested AVAs in Napa, and you source fruit from, I think, like 9 of them, or you have estate fruit in around 9 of them. So that's a huge, huge chunk of Napa that you're getting fruit from. And so you're really like all of Napa under one cellar or in one cellar door. So like, how do you manage going all over the place? Like, we're talking about you being in the vineyard and knowing when you want to harvest the fruit and do all of that. So, people benefit from having all of Napa in the one cellar door, but how does that make your life?
It just means you're on the road a bit. Harvest, especially, usually up really early to get out, start looking at vineyards bright and early to make those decisions on when you're going to pick. That's just part of the harvest routine for the winemakers. And then, eventually make your way. Every morning you kind of have a path that you choose to make your way to the winery ultimately. And once the fruit's coming in, so you can start checking in on things at the winery. But the routine is get out and taste grapes. In fact, I often joke about it. By the time harvest's over, the last thing in the world I want to eat is a grape. Like, you go to a party or a restaurant, and they've got grapes on the charcuterie board and cheese board, and you're like, no more grapes. It just wrecks you after a while. You're just like, I can't eat another grape. But it's important to be out and tasting. We also pull samples and run chemistry on it as well. But we've long been of the mindset that you've got to get out and taste the grapes and see how they're maturing. So it is a big part of that, and I'm very proud of you know, as you bring that up about all the diversity. You know, it's great to have your own estate, but also being able to source from other growers. That means that we've got all these different grapes and different styles coming in the door, and when we sit down to make our blends, we have all that diversity to play with. So, you know, much like back to a kitchen reference, you know, it's a lot of, it's like a chef having a lot of different resources to make the dish with. I think of it that way for us and all our grape sourcings throughout Napa Valley.
So I'm going to ask a difficult question. So,
all right,
do you have a favorite AVA that you enjoy the fruit from?
That's hard. I mean, probably the next most difficult thing would be, what's your favorite wine? But for me, I guess part of it is because when I first started in Napa, started working in Rutherford. So Rutherford's long been an AVA that I've always kind of been, you know, naturally attached to in some ways. But
the dust.
It's not to say that, yeah, the Rutherford dust. It's not to say that I don't enjoy wines from all over Napa, and I appreciate the diversity of all of that. I mean, it's, you know, I think a lot of people don't realize that Napa is really not that big. I mean, we're 30 miles by 5. You know, it's really not a massive area. And in this one area, to have all those different appellations, it's pretty crazy to have all that complexity available to us to work with. So, well, I may point to Rutherford as one of my favorite. I appreciate them all.
So is 9 working? Am I correct in 9 of the AVAs that you?
Yeah, I believe so. I think we're there. Yeah.
So, I mean, that really is incredible to get your fingers into each of those AVAs, and they each have their own characteristics. So when you're blending, you know, are you in your brain, are you thinking, okay, well, Rutherford provides this, so I'm going to take some of this from here, and, you know, Diamond Mountain does this, and Howell does this? Like, are you doing these formulations per se in your brain of, okay, this offers this offers this, if I bring these together, I can get this?
Yeah, I think you inherently have certain things in your mind that you just appreciate about those regions and what the wines bring. Ultimately, I will say that we do sit down, and when we're making our blends, we will taste through everything and make notes along the way. And then we start playing with the blend and say, well, it's doing really well, but we really need to add some more backbone, some tannin, let's say. All right, well, you know, the cab we had from XYZ vineyard and you know, XYZ region, that could really help us bring that into the blend. Or maybe it's already in the blend, but now we're going to increase it. We're going to double the amount we have in there. Yeah, it's definitely something you just keep, you know, even in advance of starting the blend, you have a lot of things that are kind of preconceived in your mind, especially if you've been working with them for a long time. They're kind of just naturally things you gravitate towards. However, I'll say that every blend kind of comes together a little differently. You know, even if you thought you knew where you're heading, you might start blending, and suddenly you're like, you know, back to my restaurant references, another dash of salt, you know, a splash of pepper. You know, it just, you start to, I like us to be open-minded to the fact that, you know, as much as we learn every year, there's always new lessons to be learned. And I would hope that even if I've been doing this for 30, 40 years, that I'll still be open-minded to that, and, you know, walk into every situation, every blend that way.
Let's talk a little bit about the Petite Syrah. So this is a 2018 Girard Petite Syrah. So where is this fruit coming from? Is this multiple AVAs also?
Yeah, so this is a fun one, and I'll reference as we talk about it. I'll back up to the Zin a bit too. Some of the Petite Syrah for this blend is coming from that same really old vine vineyard that we talked about for the Zin, the Calistoga location. There's a couple other smaller Petite Syrah vineyards that we source in Calistoga. They're not as old, but they're important parts of the blend. And then there's another, I call it a larger source that we're involved with in a state property that is in an area of Napa. It's not its own AVA, but is referred to as Pope Valley, which is basically on the other side of Howell Mountain from where we sit in Calistoga. And I feel like they all kind of work together. Even having those older vine Petite Syrah grapes, they add a lot of complexity. We need some of that more fresh, vibrant characteristic coming from the younger vines. And Petite Syrah, historically, when I first got introduced to it, a lot of the examples I tried just were over the top tannin, rip the enamel off your teeth. And I just, I couldn't appreciate it beyond the first, half glass or so. And so with us, we've long tried to make this a little more approachable. It still has big, bold tannins, but we look forward to it having a little more complexity, a little more, bright fruit, and a little more acidity, and just making it a more approachable style. And the reason I mentioned I was going to talk about Zin a bit as part of the way we do that is we do blended little Zin in the Petite Syrah. Okay. And I'll also mention that we do the same with the Zin. We put a little Petite Syrah on our Zin traditionally as well. And the Zin helps kind of balance some of that massive tannin out and make it a little more approachable. But a lot of it also goes back to how we handle it during harvest and fermentations by pulling it off of the skins a little earlier so we don't get too aggressive of a tannin structure. So I love Petite Syrah. I often talk about when you're in Napa or you're in the industry, you get invited to a barbecue or somebody's house or a dinner. And a lot of people will show up, here everybody's going to show up with their big, huge Napa cab. It's, their $200 bottle of cab. And it's fun to try and enjoy. But, we slide a bottle of the Petite Syrah on the table, and it's usually the first thing to go. It's just a really fun wine to enjoy with friends and family. And even on the dinner table, it works really well with food as well.
It is. And I think that's surprising to a lot of people. I think Petite Syrah, well, first of all, Petite Syrah and then Syrah. So people get confused over that concept. But Petite Syrah to me is a beautiful wine with that barbecue, with that smokiness, with all of that, as well as Zinfandel. I mean, I think Zinfandel and smoky foods that, pulled pork sandwich, something like that is like the marriage made in heaven. And I can see why you would put them together. Yeah. So let's talk, because Gerard you've been there for a long time, and you've mentioned a couple of times that you were a lot smaller back then than you are now. So when you started with Gerard, how many cases on average do you think they were producing back then?
Back then we were about 6,000 cases or so, I think.
Okay. And
pretty small. We're more in the kind of the 50 to 60,000 range right now. Okay, and that's with the understanding that we make quite a few wines that are really smaller production that we only offer at the tasting room and through wine clubs and such. We make a little over 20 different wines. So, and that includes a handful of different Cabernets from the sub AVAs, mountain districts like Diamond, Veeder, and Atlas, Howell Mountain. We even have a Rutherford and Oakville cab, Calistoga cab. So cab alone is a big part of that. But the ones I just mentioned beyond our standard Napa Valley that goes out in distribution, those are much smaller production. But and then our Sauvignon Blanc and Chardonnay kind of make up the next highest tier as far as production. But Napa Valley Cab is still our standard Napa Valley Cab blend is still our number one production wine, and that tends to be in the around 10 to 15,000 cases every year. Okay. So it's a few wines that make up the big chunk of that, and then we have this whole selection of smaller production items.
I saw that on your website.
A lot of fun with.
Yeah, I saw that on your website. Yeah. You have like sub AVAs or nested AVA designated cabs, and that that must be, I'm assuming you do, but I don't know. There's got to be a tasting that's available to people to do a cross section of those cabs to taste what the difference of each sub AVA offers to
Yeah,
that wine.
we usually have a tasting. It's an option at the winery that's focused just on those cabs, so you can get kind of a really nice kind of picture of trying Cabernets from these different districts in Napa.
And that always blows my mind because it's cab, so many people are always like, oh, a cab is a cab is a cab. And that is so not that it, you can have a cab that is the same exact alcohol, it could be 100% cab sauv. So everything is the same, except you just change where that's coming from. So like a Howell Mountain versus a Diamond is completely two different, animals.
Yeah, and I would go as far as to say, Lori, like I getting back to my restaurant references. Even if you and I were, let's use this quick example. You and I are both winemakers, much like we could be both chefs, and we could be given the exact same grapes to work with, right? Well, they're from the same exact vineyard. They're literally from the same portion of the vineyard. And there's a lot of decisions that we're going to make during harvest on how we ferment this, what temperatures and how long and how much we extend it, even how long we do extended macerations, with the grapes being soaked in the juice for extended periods of time. And then at some point, as you age, you're going to make decisions on your barrels, which is just like a chef. As chefs, if we had the same pieces of meat, everything we did, like you broiled yours and I decided to grill mine, and you used a dry rub and I marinated mine in a sauce, a marinade. And then, what sides did you decide on versus mine? So all along the way, we made all these choices. Well, it's the same with wine. So we could be, pulling from the same region and totally get different wines, even if we were pulling it from the same exact vineyard. There will be nuances that'll be similar. And that's why you could say, like, you might be able to pick out this is a Diamond Mountain Cab blindly tasting it, because there are nuances to it, but there's definitely distinction from region to region to region. And it's fun to be able to play with all those different regions and be able to offer them to people, as their own individual bottlings. Equally fun for us is to make that Napa Valley version that, now we get to work with all those different options to play with. So we can sprinkle a little bit of Diamond Mountain, we can sprinkle in some Rutherford as needed. And all these different regions kind of come into play to make one wine. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. So can you explain, because you do all of your wine as small batch fermentations. So can you please explain what is meant by a small batch fermentation? And then at what point is it not considered small batch anymore?
I guess that's subject to how somebody might define it. But what we do is we basically look at the fermentations as anything that comes in the door from a particular vineyard and on a particular day. As much as possible, we're going to keep that on its own. Now, that on some of our mountain designates or some of our more premium vineyards, that could be as little as 2 or 3 tons that we're going to keep separate in its own tank. But let's say I'm buying fruit from Lori's or your Oakville vineyard, right? And let's say traditionally we would pull 20 tons from that vineyard for sourcing. And amongst those vines that we're pulling from, you have a section that's kind of more on the level part of the vineyard. Then you have another that's on a little hillside. You might even have one that's a specific clone that we want to keep segmented as well. Or maybe one section's older, one's younger. There's different rootstock. There's all these different differences that could develop in the decision making of keeping them segmented. So it'd be really easy for us to just say, pick all 20 tons, bring it to the winery. We're going to put it in one big tank, and we'll be done with it. And we have some bigger lots that are in that category as far as tons. But what we'd rather do is determine if we want those segmented, and if so, bring those in individually. So instead of one 20-ton fermenter, we might have put that more hillside stuff that's like 8 tons in this fermenter by itself. And then we took the one that's a different clone and put it in another fermenter, and that was about 6 tons, whatever. And you just kind of, segment. And the beauty of when we build Gerard that we try and maintain to today is that we built it with a lot of different smaller format vessels, fermenters. So we have that flexibility. You know, of course I say that right now, and then during harvest we're like, we're out. We need more. You know? Never enough. Never the one you need in that moment. It never works out perfectly. But by giving ourselves a lot of flexibility in the design of the place and all these different format sizes to work with, I can now take those 20 tons of your Oakville cab that we feel are unique and different and keep them separate. Now it's possible that we may blend them back together down the road, but we like having the flexibility of having these different options so that when we go to blend, you know, let's say one of them had that big tannin structure that we needed in that moment. Maybe one shows a different type of fruit because it's a different clone. It you know, accents different nuances of fruit characteristics, or you know, maybe one's just got this brighter acidity to it that just works really well, but we don't want too much of that, as an example. So having them segmented means that down the road, when we go to blend, we have more options in our toolbox to play with. So as much as we can continue to do that, we do, just to give ourselves more options for future Glenn. You know, he gets the opportunity. Try and be nice to future Glenn.
But there you go. So I think that is a perfect time, because you take all of these small batch fermentations, you take all of your fruit, and they're kept separate, but now it's time to blend them together. And I think that is what artistry is really kind of about, right? So we have, this is a
Absolutely.
Bordeaux blend wine. And so that's basically what you're doing is you have these small batches and now you're going to blend them together. So tell us about artistry and how you build this bottle.
Well, artistry is, you know, as you mentioned, it's our representation of a Bordeaux style blend. You know, we don't kid ourselves. We know we're in California, so we know we're that. It's not like we're saying that that's going to taste like a Bordeaux wine. And I know a lot of your viewers are aware of that, but I like to point it out. We are still California style, and grapes are still getting riper than what you would see in Bordeaux. But we are using the traditional 5 different grape varieties of grape, I should say, that you would normally see in Bordeaux. So in our blend, it's almost always dominant Cab. So usually it's in the 60 to 70% range of Cab. Merlot, Cab Franc, Petit Verdot, and Malbec make up the rest of the blend. So those 5 traditional varietal wines are blended to make this. And you know, much like I keep alluding to with Cabernet, we have all these different Cabernets to work with. In a smaller subsection, we have a nice variety of different Merlot to play with, different Cabernet Franc, Malbec, and Petit Verdot. And while there's less selection of different vineyards, even using small amounts of these other varietals in the blend have huge impact. So, you know, I often talk about how Cabernet is, you know, as a component is there to be the big structure, the dark fruit, you know, tannin, just kind of the oomph of the wine. We then incorporate Merlot, which can have a softer side to it and help kind of calm down some of those characteristics of the Cab, but also bring in some, you know, really nice red fruit notes. Our Cabernet Francs tend to have that more floral, you know, a little more perfumey noses. Ours, we tend to get a little more bold and ripe and a little less green. So that's kind of the style of Franc that we like. So that'll really add nicely to the blend as well. And then I often describe the Malbec as being a mid-palate lift that we look for, where we often are working on blends and it kind of falls out in the middle of the palate. There's not a lot going on, and they often refer to it as a donut hole. So this is the donut hole filler. Malbec just kind of lifts the mid palate, gives us some nice juicy characteristics that allow for that to just kind of connect the front and the back of the palate. And then the one that's probably less discussed is Petit Verdot. I like talking about Petit Verdot.
Love Petit Verdot.
Yeah, me too. If we were standing in the cellar tasting through barrels, I like to make sure people try it on its own, because not a lot of people are aware, you know, what it's like by itself. it has this reputation as a blender. And we often, as winemakers, we often talk about how it adds this big structure because it can add some boldness to it. But there's actually a very, a more softer side to Petit Verdot. The fruits are really kind of more in the bluish category for me. And I love that about it. It can add a nice nuance of blue fruit notes. But there's also this white floral note on the aromatics that just adds a really nice touch to bigger red wine blends like Cabernet blends, because it just kind of creates a little background. I'm going to use the word pretty, but it has a pretty nose. And here it is, this big, strong, bold grape and characteristics of wine, but has a prettier side to it as well. So taking all 5 of those together and sitting down at a table with all these selections in front of us and again, tasting them all individually, but then starting to work up in your mind, how can this blend come together? For us, this is the moment in winemaking where there's kind of a shift from the last year and a half, 2 years. You've been taking care of the wine. It's, there's a lot of focus on the science of it, the chemistry of the winemaking. You want to make sure the wine is healthy. That's your main goal. In this moment, when we sit down to blend, we kind of do that shift from the science to the artistic side of winemaking. And, that's where the name artistry came about, that, this is the blending process is more the artistic side of things. So artistry would just seem like a perfect fit for the name of our red wine blend, because this is our shift of left brain, right brain. It's the time where the winemakers kind of focused on, the art of winemaking as a sense.
And now another hat that a winemaker needs to wear is kind of like an architectural hat, right? So you have all of these wines, you have your sub-AVA cabs, and then you have the Petit Syrah, the Zin, and then the artistry. Is there an architectural concept of, when it comes time for blending, right? Do you start someplace and work your way to, what order are you going in? Are you doing okay, these are the barrels that I want to go into my cab. And then, these barrels are my favorite barrels. So they're going to go into that single AVA designated. And now I have this reserved for artistry. Like, what's that architecture in your brain?
Yeah, it's a great question. We are always thinking about that. When we sit down and taste, something to kind of keep in mind, we're tasting a composite blend of the whole lot, right? So we may have made decisions to use that in the blend, but what we have to do thereafter is go back and taste the individual barrels. So when we're doing that portion of it is when we start making decisions where we're like, what, this particular barrel, and I hate when I only have one of a particular barrel. I love it when we have at least a few options of it, because if it's something you really enjoy, you want many of them, right? You want to say, I want to put one in this one and one in this one and this one. But to focus on the sub-AVAs, because we specifically are designating them from that region. And, it's not that we have 20 Diamond Mountain vineyards. So, we have to make sure that we can make that blend, but we also want those leftovers. So when we contract for the grapes, if they're from another vineyard, the mindset is, okay, how much do we actually need for those sub AVAs? Okay, we need X amount. All right, I want a little bit more because I want to be able to use it in our other blends. But to answer your question, yeah, when we're in there tasting through the barrels, that's kind of when we're starting to make the decisions of, all right, well, this particular barrel makes the cab really bold and big tannins, really showcases that part of it. This one is more of the earth tones, and it's got that leathery tobacco note to it, even some mushrooms. So cool, that's interesting. But maybe we only want one barrel of that in this blend, and the other barrels can go to the other blends. So it is, yeah, to your point, there's an architectural kind of mindset of how do we build this, and what are the pieces we want to use, and what would they do to add layers of complexity to even our bigger blends when we start making our artistry is not a huge blend, but it's a step up from the production of our sub AVA wines, which can only be like 200 cases, let's say. Artistry, we will usually do about 1,500 cases, so still not huge, but another step up. And then, as I mentioned, when we start making our Napa Valley Cabernet, we could be in the 10,000 plus range. So those layers of complexity are important. It's just a much bigger blend. So, their impact, at smaller amounts is lesser, but I still think they're really important.
And then when it comes time to your small batch fermentations, now you've been with Gerard, so I don't know. Have you ever been at a facility that does just large batch fermentation?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Our company, that we have other wineries of ours that are much, much larger than ours. And it's about, we're talking, that can do one of our biggest tanks. Our biggest tank could do up to 32 tons. We have wineries that do, 100+ ton ferments. So yeah, there's plenty of them around.
And what do you think is the difference as a winemaker? Because there's got to be a different mindset between having these large batch fermentations and then having all of these little babies that you've got to take care of. It's like one child versus having triplets or quadruplets or sextuplets.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some different mentalities. I mean, you usually in the larger facilities where you have larger fermentations, there's much more mechanicalized, processes where, it's a push of a button to do things. And I'm not saying that I wouldn't even want to do that in some of the aspects of our winery. We just haven't gotten to that point with ours. We have a little more coddling going on, I think, in our world at this size, with these much smaller ferments. Where you can amplify challenges on a smaller fermentation that may be less noticeable in a much bigger one.
Okay.
You're a little more forgiving in a bigger fermentation if there's problems along the way. Whereas a really small fermentation, you have challenges with it. That's all you got.
Right.
This is 3 tons of your Diamond Mountain Cab. You can't mess it up. So the anxiety is there for sure, just naturally built in. But the focus on, paying attention to these, when I often describe kind of the life of wine to, let's say, an intern, I mentioned to them that they're actually here to help us babysit our infants, right? These grapes are coming in the door and they're just newly born to become wine. And what they're doing from this point in time, we're walked in the door till, let's say, we put it off to college when it goes into a barrel. It's a short period of time to much like raising a child. You're going to help instill, the characteristics that are going to help make that wine who it's going to be, and it's a small window of taking really good care of it, giving it all the right nutrients and food and love and attention. And for us, that's pump overs, that's nutrients that we add for the yeast to be healthy and make sure that the yeast has a nice, or let's call it boring development and fermentation. Whereas if it's too fast and too crazy a fermentation, we lose some aspects of the winemaking. So these are things that we think about and we kind of explain to our interns that, like, when you're here, we're going to rely on you to help us just, coddle these and make sure everything goes right with them, because we know what will come of it if we can keep all those things in check. It'll make the wine even better. So, it's kind of looking at it in that aspect that we want to be there. That's why a harvest is such an important time for us. It's a lot of hours, a lot of work, but it's, the one time to get it right in the development of the wine.
Right. And now, are you using? How are you choosing your yeast? Are you using commercial or native?
We use a combination of it in the sense that we have some that are naturally start fermenting, but I've long been a fan of eventually just making the decision of choosing what's going to finish a fermentation.
That is important.
Native yeast, yeah, native yeasts they can be really cool and showcase some really interesting things in wine, but if they don't do their ultimate job, if they stall out or you have problems with them, that's where you can be more worried about other problems in the wine. So for me, it's important that we come in at some point and we're instilling something that is tried and true for us, and to that end we have specific yeast that we use for Cab versus Zen, as an example, Chardonnay, versus even Sauvignon Blanc. Just because there's yeast that offer characteristics that are more, traditionally more, part of what you would look for in that particular varietal wine. So you find a yeast that works really well with Sauvignon Blanc that gives you, some nice floral notes, but also, showcases some of the citrus characteristics you may want. In a Cabernet yeast that helps build structure, but at the same time kind of accent darker fruit notes. Whereas the Zen you might look for something that has more, let's say, mixed berry characteristics to it. So yeast choice are kind of, every winemaker has an opinion. Everyone has their favorites. I'm also the mindset that I want to keep learning. So over the years, we've tried many different yeasts, and usually we do this in a small format and try it on a smaller lot and then see how those nuances are. So anything new to us, even though we like to explore, usually takes 2 or 3 years till we get acclimated to it and say, okay, this is what we want to do. But I like being open-minded to the fact that we never know what our next great discovery could be.
That is so true. That is so true. If you stick to the same thing over and over again, you don't know what you're missing out on. There could be great adventures out there, right?
Exactly.
So tell me, where can people find Girard Winery? How can they taste this wine? How can they get it in their glass?
Well, Gerard is distributed. 6 of our wines are distributed throughout the country. You'll find our Napa Valley Cab, the Artistry you just mentioned, the Zen, the Petite Syrah, and then the 2 whites I've been alluding to are Sauvignon Blanc and our Chardonnay as well. So those 6 wines are out in the market. We've been distributed around the country for quite a while. Usually in the retail side, you may find one or two in some slightly bigger retailers, and then when you get into the smaller retailers is where you might find like the Petit Syrah, Zen, and such. Otherwise, though, we're based out of Napa. We have a tasting room, as we mentioned, brand new winery to us. In 2018 it was built. So we have a tasting room there, and then of course we have online opportunities to purchase and wine clubs that are a lot of fun as well. So lots of ways to access us. We'd hope the best way would be to see you, on our doorstep one day. We can share a glass, and you can sit on our lovely patio and,
I
soak
hear
it all
there's
in.
spectacular views.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I am excited because when I get up there, I'm going to have to. I really want to. The whole terroir thing, I absolutely love. I love how the soil impact and the microclimate impacts things. So to do a side by side, a horizontal of the different cabs it's got to be an amazing experience there. So that is what I will be doing when I get up there in the near future.
Well, we look forward to it for sure.
Well, thank you so much for joining me and taking this time out of your very busy day. Did I miss anything that you want to make sure people know about Gerard? You are on social media. But did I miss anything that you want to make sure?
No, I just reiterate that we'd always, if you visit Napa Valley, come see us. We're up in the northern part of up in Calistoga. Great spot, and some hopefully wines you'll enjoy, and get some time to talk to you and chat through all the different wines we have to offer. And we welcome you to visit. If you can't visit us, look for us in the market, and we'll wait till you can make it out here someday.
Awesome. And I did see they can make reservations online, so it's super simple. Yes. If you're going out there, make a reservation.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I have one little swig left of my Old Vine Zin that I always end with slancha. So thank you for joining me. I know it's you've got water, but slancha.
I've got water right now, but yeah, slancha. Thank you, Lori.
Thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
You too.
Bye.
Cheers. Bye.